Hello and welcome to the Tennis Menu Daily US Open shows. Day 2, we're into day 1 of the tournament. We did our draw analysis yesterday. I think that went pretty well. Not for me because I picked Coco Gauff to get through to the quarterfinals and she didn't. Febbo here with you and Marc Sophoulis joining me on the other line. It's been a great day, Marc. Thank you so much for being here again. And I look forward to digging into your mind today, into some of your coaching philosophies and what you think players should do in certain situations. This is where we sink our teeth into the tournament, and it is a pleasure to have you on.
It is always a pleasure being with you, Febbo, and obviously what a big day it was at the US Open. Plenty of news stories to go around. The one that I picked, the big roughie, didn't actually come through. Kevin Anderson losing in the first round as Zverev, but that's okay. You've got one bad one, I've got bad ones, and we'll move on from that. We'll get better as the tournament goes on. Just don't put your money where our bets are. I think at the moment we're 0 from 1, and hopefully we can get better today.
Fingers crossed. But yeah, Coco Gauff out to Anastasia Sevastova and Kevin Anderson. Well, Alexander Zverev, I've never seen the guy volley so well. And Brad Gilbert said it this morning, which I enjoyed this quote. He's like a stone at the net. And I'd never heard that before, but meaning that his hands are a stone and that he doesn't have very flexible wrists or anything like that. But seriously, in the third set, his net game upped the ante, and that essentially helped him win the match and get on top 2-1 and then go on there. Karolina Pliskova, the number 1 seed, she's through 6-4, 6-love over Annalena Kalinina. Angie Kerber also through. Denis Shapovalov, Novak Djokovic, and many, many more. John Isner, a big seed, falling 7-6 in the 5th to Steve Johnson, and also Diego Schwartzman, the number 9 seed, out to Cam Norrie after being 2-love up. I'm going to ask you about that match in a twofold question a little bit later. Stefanos Tsitsipas also through on the men's side. He destroyed Albert Ramos Vinales. And on the women's side, not too many of the seeds were upset this morning. A lot of 3-setters, but the Aussies, Madison Inglis, Arina Rodionova, Astra Sharma, and Lizette Cabrera, all falling. Not good results for the Aussie women. Jordan Thompson has gone through. Marta Kostyuk storming through Daria Kasatkina, 6-1, 6-2 in a massive win for her, for the young gun. You've worked with her as well. Caroline Garcia also through. The only real seed that's gone out for the women is Rebecca Peterson falling to Kirsten Flipkens 7-6, 6-4. So it's been a pretty good day and a consistent day for the top-ranked women. So it's been a good morning for them. The men have done pretty well, couple of upsets, but overall a pretty good day, Marc.
Yeah, it was an interesting day. Probably went mostly to plan, and obviously the John Isner one was a bit of a surprise, losing to a fellow countryman. A lot of tie breaks there. But one thing I sort of looked at this morning when I looked at the results was how many 3-set matches in the women's, how many 5-set matches in the men's, and whether or not that's just players trying to get their feel back and a little bit inconsistent with their performances. But that was kind of the standout for me. A bit of cramping was going on. Obviously, a bit of fitness issues for a lot of players, and I think that's the talking point at the moment is how well prepared are these athletes, coming off such a long break from the tour and trying to get back into best of 3, best of 5-set matches is quite challenging.
Well, what's something that you would tell your pupil? So say you've got a guy who's coming back and he's about to play a Grand Slam tournament. He's had 4 months off. What are you telling him to do in that stoppage and in that suspended play time? How are you getting him match fit? Because there's no such thing like playing a match. It's its own sort of unique thing. But how are you teaching or how are you coaching someone to come back and be able to play a 4 or 5 hour match?
Yeah, that's a challenging thing because as you hit the nail on the head, you spoke about being match hard or match fit. Now, you can't be match fit if you don't have matches. It's pretty plain and simple, right? So, at the end of the day, the lead up to these events, basically what I would be doing is advising my athlete, if as a male player, we're playing some 5-set matches and play them over not consecutive days, but with a day in between. And that would hopefully get some match hardness into them, regardless of whether you beat the player at the other end in straight sets. Play 5 actual sets of match play. The other thing is, if you're trying to, and the hardest thing is getting the right hitting partners to do that, but you may bring in a fresh player every set, and that can then keep you on the ball, your feet, on your toes, keep you really mentally switched on, is you have to play each set on its own merit because every player will come in fresh. So it is a real challenge, Val, because at the end of the day, as a coach, you can't simulate the pressure. So there's always, nervous energy being spent in these matches at the Grand Slams, and it's not being spent in practice. But you can simulate time on court, energy, intensity, work rate. You can simulate some physical activities in between sets. So, a lot of the time when I was working with players before the Australian Open, we play a set, we do a physical rep or for 15 or 20 minutes, back on for another set, 15, 20 minutes of physical work and replicate that. So, that is the real challenge. And obviously without playing those matches, it's very hard for an athlete to be match fit.
Yeah, it is. And even I remember back a few years ago when Sam Groth had his toe injury at the back end of 2015, 2016, he couldn't win a match to save his life.
Yep.
To start that season. And I remember it was because of the lack of match practice that he had, and it was really unfortunate. But that's the bottom line in tennis. You need to be match fit and you need to be able to play matches. And that's where the Hopman Cup was such a beautiful thing at the start of a year for injured players like Federer in 2017, coming back, getting those 6 guaranteed matches. That's what you want as a player. You want the guaranteed matches, you want the guaranteed sets, and that's what players need to try and work on, which you've alluded to there. But one match, and I did say this off the top, I want to ask you about Diego Schwartzman and Cam Norrie. So Schwartzman won the first 2 sets, but Norrie ran away with the next 2, 6-2, 6-1, and then won the last 4 games of the 5th set, was down 5-3. Schwartzman match point on Norrie's serve. He saved it. Down match point again on Schwartzman's serve. Norrie saved it again and got through. Schwartzman cramping, had a bit of a fall on court as well. But the mindset of a player 2 sets to love down, what are you telling them as their coach? Are you trying to make them are you trying to signal to them anything during the match? And B, cramping, how hard is it to overcome during a match?
Yeah, I guess the first one, 2 sets to love down. I mean, you're sitting in the coach's box. There's not much you can do. All the planning's done. And that's the hardest thing at that moment in time is you're sitting there going, okay, all the plans have been done. What can we do? Now, with a lot of athletes I've worked with in the past, we've actually had game plan A, B, and C. Now, at that moment in time, if the game plans weren't working, 1 or 2 of them, I'd say, okay, let's go to plan C. Let's go. Okay, and it's kind of an instruction to go back and read your notes. To go back and have a look and see what we need to do now is change the momentum of the match. At this level of the game, you would expect the players themselves to be able to take initiative and take ownership over their decision making though. So if I'm having to make that decision for them, I haven't coached them well enough. The job of a coach is to make yourself redundant. If you can make yourself redundant and the player's able to think for themselves on the court, you've done your job amazingly well. Now, obviously, we want to keep a job. We want to keep food on the table. So at the end of the day, we want to coach really well and keep our job. So that's obviously a twofold effect. But, I really like my athletes to be able to make their own decisions. And I know I'm coaching really well if my player is able to get out of that situation, as Cam Norrie did in that match. What a phenomenal effort to not only be 2 sets to love down, but to also win 4 games in a row at the back end of a 5-set match and win the match the way he did against a quality opponent. That's never easy to do. So, yeah, hopefully that answers that question. And then from a cramping perspective, I was actually speaking to a group of athletes yesterday about mindset. On average, the average human being has between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts a day. So you can imagine how many thoughts are going through your head, regardless of whether you're cramping or not. You add cramping into that, and all of a sudden you start thinking of the negatives. Oh, what if I can't get through? What if, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Schwartzman's in a situation where he's 1 point away from winning the match. I guarantee you one of his thoughts would have been, thank God I'm nearly done here. I'm going to get through this. He loses that point. Then the comeback starts and then the doubts start to happen and it's a flow-on effect. So the mindset is a really critical component. It's the most important component of the game. And if you can't control those thoughts, you can't control your actions. So no doubt those thoughts did creep in at Diego Schwartzman's mind.
And would the thought have come in saying, oh, how am I going to pull up for my next match now? And he would have been thinking way too far ahead than staying in the present moment. And that probably wouldn't have helped his concentration either. And you're right. There's so many different thoughts pop into your head. And that's why the top guys have been so good, because they can block it out. And especially what Novak can do under pressure and how he can just go into full concentration mode and just make his face blank. It is unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's the art. Sorry, Phil. That's the art of mindfulness. And I think we've spoken about this before. And I did do a blog on mindfulness. It's so important that you practice mindset work. So over this time of COVID, I think it's been important that the players not only work physically and try and get themselves back on the court, but it's the mental component. And the mental health has been a really big area of talk over the last 6 months, especially during COVID. But I think that's been a real big play. And today you saw the players that were able to be really strong mentally go through those big matches.
Yep, absolutely right. And you can head to the tennismenu.com in the blog section for that piece. Mark said that on Breakpoint Podcast with myself and Joel Ferrucci. So head to that. Really good piece and great insight into the art of mindfulness from the coach's point of view. But moving on, looking at the women's side of the draw, you've got Anastasia Sevastova against Coco Gauff. The match there going 6-3, 5-7, 6-4 in favour of the Latvian. But you look at the results. And if you're Sevastova and you're coming up against a player who you know at the top of her game is an absolute superstar, but she's a dangerous floater. There's pressure kind of on both players, but there's a lot of pressure coming on her side of the net as well from the American public and the hometown hero. What do you do? And obviously not having crowd helps from an international point of view. But what do you do when you're coming up against a player who's playing in their home tournament and they've got the pressure on them? How do you try and work them into succumbing to that pressure?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. Now I've had to deal with that many times at the Australian Open with our players. I've coached a lot of Aussies at the Australian Open, and the pressure's pretty big because the newspapers only write about the Aussies. It's generally the front page of the paper is no Aussies get through first round and so forth, and it's generally a real challenge. And as a coach, you have to take away that fact somehow. And as much as you want them to ride the emotion and the wave of the Australian public can be quite challenging. And I can guarantee you the American public would be exactly the same. They want their players to win. They're patriotic, and when they don't, they'll be the first ones to give them a big rev up. And I think that's the challenge with any hometown player is there's more pressure than there is good, and especially with no crowd, Coco Gauff couldn't feed off any energy, so she's having to deal with what are the American public thinking? What are people going to say? What's my coach going to say? I'm been playing really well. I did really well in my last couple of events, but now I've had a break. I should be doing better than what, there's a lot of different things that go through. And being a young athlete, Coco Gauff's got a lot of pressure on her shoulders as well, because she's actually started so well. It's going to be hard to maintain that. And obviously she'll feel that pressure, but there's no doubt, today was a tough match for her as well as Sevastova. I think it was a real 50-50 ball game, and obviously it went down the wire.
It sure did, and absolutely, it was fantastic quality. I've watched the highlights. Brilliant matchup. And Gauff, this is just a little blip in her career. She'll be seeded soon enough, and then we won't be seeing any more dangerous first-round matchups for her. Breaking news: Naomi Osaka is through after a scare against compatriot Misaki Doi. She wins 6-2, 5-7, 6-2 to get through to the second round. So she could be on for a match with Sevastova in the third round. Marta Kostyuk is another one that I want to ask you about, Mark. I remember I met you at the Australian Open a few years ago and you were watching her practice and doing stuff. I think was it with her coach? What did you take from those early meetings with Marta and how she can develop and how she has developed? Because it's kind of plateaued for her since that third round appearance at the 2018 Oz Open, but this is a big win.
Yeah, I spent a little bit of time with her team. So her manager is a friend of mine, and he's done a great job, getting her on his team. But she's an amazing talent. At the Australian Open that year, she did a great job. She's been multiple players getting through to a few rounds, and it plateaued a little bit. I think it was just more maturity for her. She gets coached by her mum, and she has Ivan Lubicic doing a little bit with her and that team as well. So there's a few people involved with her development. I think it's just a bit of a bump in the road for her over the last year or so. Now she's actually starting to play some good tennis. She looks like a real strong woman now, not just a little girl anymore. And always had the ability, always had the physical capabilities, the strokes, everything was there. It was more the mindset, trying to get that to be more consistent. And it looks like she's turned a little corner. I just wonder whether or not it's going to be sustainable. She's got the talent. Whether or not that takes her to another level like Coco Gauff remains to be seen. But, gee, she can hit a ball. And it would not surprise me if she goes deep into Grand Slams in the next few years, because she's a great talent.
Yep, she sure is. And just before we do go, this is kind of a quick fire type show that we're going to bring you every day throughout the US Open. But some breaking news overnight. Benoit Paire, the saga continues with his COVID outbreak. We discussed this yesterday, Mark. So Noah Rubin came out on his podcast with Mike Cation behind the racket and said there's 11 close contacts that Paire has been in touch with. The USTA has made them sign an agreement saying that they can play the tournament, but they have to isolate in the hotel and they will still be permitted on the grounds, whereas they've completely backflipped on their previous rules, saying that you have to isolate for 14 days if you're a close contact and you can't play the US Open. It's what happened with Hugo Dellien and Guido Pella. They couldn't play in Cincinnati. So why has this changed now? Well, one of the reasons that I think Daniil Medvedev is one of the close contacts. Benoit Paire played with him and practiced with him before the tournament. This is getting into some really dangerous territory because a lot of the players are fuming. And Ellen Perez, one of the Australians, has voiced her concerns on Twitter, saying one of the reasons I came here was that I could be a third alternate for singles. And now you're allowing just anybody to play. Why did I come here? Because I thought I might be a chance. And if you're doing this isn't fair on the rest of us who have come here and are doing the right things. So what do you tell your player if he or she is in this bracket of being absolutely furious that they can't get a game, or they're sort of getting screwed over a little bit by the rules? What do you tell that player, and how do you try and coach them from being in a really negative mindset to saying, you know what, look, you're here. It's unfortunate that this is going to happen, but, we have to move on from this.
Control the controllables. It's one of my main focuses of coaching is just control what you can control. At the end of the day, you don't make the decisions. It's the USTA that make those decisions. And if they decide to do that, then they decide to do it. You can't do anything about it, unfortunately. I think it's a crazy, crazy idea. I feel like there's been players that were quarantined, and Guido Pella is one of them, who hasn't been able to hit until today. And he plays tomorrow. And that's quite a challenging one. And all these other players are able to play, hit, be on site. And I think you can't have two rules. It's black or it's white. It's not grey. And I think that's the area that we need to understand that, there's got to be guidelines. If you're going to run an event, you run it properly and you stay strong on your morals. And no matter who it is, the name is irrelevant. I think at the end of the day, you need to run a safe event. Otherwise, it could be disastrous for the game moving forward.
Yep, 100%. And fingers crossed that we can come to the bottom of some sort of rules and some sort of consistency here by the USTA. But Mark, it has been an absolute pleasure today. We'll wrap this up. But tomorrow, Andy Murray, Serena Williams, Venus Williams, Daniil Medvedev, Dominic Thiem, Garbine Muguruza, Sofia Kenin, Grigor Dimitrov, Madison Keys, Felix Auger-Aliassime, Alex de Minaur, Matteo Berrettini, and Kim Clijsters, plus Victoria Azarenka, all in action. It is going to be a huge day of tennis tomorrow, and I'm really looking forward to it. Marc Sophoulis, thank you very much for joining me here on the Tennis Menu's daily US Open shows.
Thank you very much, Val. And yeah, what a great first day that was at the US Open. Looking forward to what day two has to bring, because there's a lot of good players out there, as you did say, and looking forward to seeing the veterans, the Azarenkas, the Serena Williamses, bring those ones on. And Andy Murray, how good is it to see him back on the court?
Fantastic. First Grand Slam for him since the 2019 Australian Open in the singles draw. Anyway, but remember, you can follow the Tennis Menu at the Tennis Menu on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook. Search the Tennis Menu, and LinkedIn as well. We're on there. And remember, thetennismenu.com for anything you need to do with tennis. Mark has so many drills up there. Nick, George, and Mark do such an unbelievable job, and it's going gangbusters at the moment. So, and if you need any news, head to the blog section. Some pieces by myself or Mark are on there. I've been Febbo. Have an awesome day. Enjoy your early morning tomorrow, tennis fans.